All right, we're recording. We're back once again.
Yeah.
We- We'll finish this when we all are fucking dying, I feel like. All right, you guys see this, right?
Yeah.
All right. So last time we did section five, and basically from what I remember and what I'm seeing in my notes, we're still, I think the general idea in human language, what he was trying to say here is that look, there are these different types of reading uh, about Marx, but then you go a level down, you see that Marx is while he's reading, he's also writing, of course. In his writing, he's reading these classical liberal texts like Ricardo and Smith. And, of course, Althusser wants to say that, yeah, Marx was showing up these deficiency in these texts, but kind of the long way of going about it is talking about how sometimes, this dialectics of um, presence and absence, right? Like, how can a text kind of cover something by in this attempt to like elucidate or reveal, and that revelation itself is some form of absent, and that is not by omission or not mentioning things. Really, it's the presentation of world as such. I guess I think that's the most general, easiest way I can kind of put this down. And moreover, and I'll just rest on this. Well, yeah, let me stop there, I guess. I don't know if there is anyone would quibble with this. Yeah. Um that what yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, and I
and it's
think
all the
he's
yeah, go ahead, Jack.
I think he's saying too, like, he's kind of rejecting like a Hegelian reading of Marx. Like the
Right.
early Marx, it would be this kind of just flipping Hegel on his head and being humanist, but we're still retaining most of that kind of framework. And also the Gramscian reading, which is more kind of about hegemony and culture and the superstructure.
Right.
Like Althusser is like we need to look at the economy, the base, and like take capital as this kind of creation or formation of a new science of political economy.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important, that idea of kind of this new science and this kind of same kind of Freudian approach of like being like, no, look, like there is a more kind of structured, um, a technical way of looking at text or things or people or sexuality, whatever it might be. But yeah, you see that here again in this symptomatic reading of kind of recentering economy. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like Freud kind of uncovering kind of like you were saying before, like these kind of omissions or um, like lacuna as he uses that word,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that were there in earlier theorists.
Yeah, and I think for it, I mean, not only the text mentions him, I mean, it's really important, right? Like you're talking about Freud, talking about jokes, right? I mean, jokes are not that they hide something, but it's like the the way that the kind of the the direct meaning of a joke references some other thing that is not uh clearly present or identified. And you're right. The Althusser's reading of Marx, he wants to say we're going away from humanism You know, I probably just saw, Heidegger and to start writing these essays against humanism or kind of human-centric start of the science of sociology and economy. And yeah, we want to get away from Hegel with this total movement of the spirit and in history, or putting it short form, idealism. So we were basically just getting there. Um, yeah, okay, so starting with this section six, um, we see these questions posed again, and I believe if these are like lectures of different days or they were done in same day, they were taught a piece, because he always kind of refers back to some of the ideas from the previous one. And maybe read here, it says, he poses the question again, and I'm going to highlight this. This is where I'm starting. Does the classical political economy produce, just as Engels will say in the preface to Volume 2, that phlogistic chemistry produced oxygen, and classical economics produced surplus value? The correct answer, this is the answer to vision, non-vision. The value of labor is equal to the value of the subsistence goods necessary for the reproduction of labor. A correct answer is a correct answer. Any reader in the first manner will give Smith and Ricardo a good mark and pass on to the other observations. Not Marx, for what we shall call his eye has been attracted by a remarkable property of this answer. It is the correct answer to a question that has just one failing. It was never posed. And this section, he's referring to that long section about kind of these different theories of value that Marx was talking about in volume one.
And I'll explain the flagellistic theory. That's kind of like
Please.
a phlogiston, which early chemistry, like turn of the century, turn of 1900s, um, had this idea of why flame is produced, like trying to explain flame and fire. They thought there was a substance called phlogiston that kind of was released from the wood, and then they found that no, there's conservation of mass in fire.
Oh,
So they
got
kind
it,
of made
got
up
it.
this whole thing to solve this problem that they had, but they, weren't asking the problem correctly. I think is what he's getting at. Like
Okay,
this answer,
like kind of like ether,
yeah,
or yeah, okay.
very
Yeah.
much
So
like ether.
right, right. And he moves on immediately. Engels is moving straight to um Engels of Smith, right? It's like, yeah, I have this problem. I don't know why things are worth anything, or rather that kind of the production of things that are related to the production in society. And then they're like, oh, of course, like value is equal to the value of, the goods it would take to reproduce the workers so they can kind of come back every day, the next day. And that seems to be something what they were trying to do with chemistry, I presume. I'm not really too
Yeah,
informed
they're
about this
like
previous series.
fire comes from like fire stuff that's there in like wood
Right.
and other physical things, which doesn't
Hmm.
really explain it because you're just saying, well, it's just from the stuff that's fire. Fire is fire. Like when you get to the question, like the value of
Yeah.
labor comes from the value of labor.
Right, right. And or like the thing that is that the labor is consuming, that turns to that becomes labor or something like that. It has already existed. And I guess from
Whereas like
there.
fire now is more, you would say it's like a chemical reaction itself it's caused
Uh-huh.
rather than some
And
kind of substance there.
yeah, and it's really interesting, like reading like some of these kind of Marxist chemists and stuff like that. There were some really good books early on. I'm not aware of any like recently, but from like 60s, 70s, 80s that they try to be like, oh no, like, Hegel and these guys, like their kind of philosophies can be used to like explain scientific processes, right? For example, you take a seed grows into a baby plant. The baby plant is not the seed, but is off of it through some, dialectic process, and then the baby plant is a negation of the seed, thus, and then the plant turns into a tree. The tree is the, negation of the seed, and the plant it is developing, and so on and so forth. Um, okay, so then we go on here. What is he saying? Maybe I should read this part from the beginning. The original question, as the classical economic text formulated it, was what was the value of labor, reduced to the content that can be rigorously defended in texts where classical economics produced it? The answer should be written as follows. The value of labor is equal to the value of subsistence goods necessary for the maintenance and production of labor. There are two blanks, two absences in the text of the answer. Thus, Marx makes us see blanks in the text of classical economics answer, but that is merely to make us see what the classical text itself says while not saying it, does not say while saying it. Hence, it is not Marx who says what the classical text does not say. It is not Marx who intervenes to impose from without on the classical text a discourse which reveals its silence. It is the classical text itself which tells us that it is silent. Its silence, its own words. Okay, I mean that's that's a huge claim. But before we get to that claim, I mean, that again, it's correct, right? The value of labor is equal to the value of subsistent goods necessary for the maintenance and reproduction of the labor. But like this kind of answer is circular because the the subsistent goods have value because they're commodities, right? So where the value of them come from? Oh, it comes from the subsistent goods that the worker but consumed to then come to work to produce these subsistent goods. Doesn't it really doesn't address anything. That's one
Kind of
point.
goes
And
would kind of go back and regress forever. Like, well, where did those goods come from that one
right.
labor? Well, if they were before them, and there's like this, the first laborer ever created the first good, and then like passed it down to you get Robinson Crusoe kind of there. And also, I think
Yeah.
it's too equivalent because then where does profit come in? Like, how do they make money off it? It becomes well, they sell it on the market. It's the mistake of classical one of the mistakes of classical economics to like think that or like I think a lot of people still think this about capitalism that it's buying something cheap and selling it for more expensive is how it works. Like
Surplus value.
money through the market or supply and demand, which he'll get to it that and Marx rejects all that.
Right, right. And so
What's
yeah,
an
so let
aspect to like retail and profit? I'm still working on volume two, but anyway,
right, right. Yeah, no, exactly. And finances, of course, which, a couple of kind of readers of Marx said like they're in the third volume and stuff, that's what he was developing. But yeah, so like in that section that we read, there is, of course, that point. Then on top of that point, he's talking about, look, Marx is like not pointing these things out in the text or like critiquing. He's just like putting it out there and the kind of the deficiencies, um, the silences are within the word, as he puts it. And he says, in fact, we suppress our suspension points, our blanks. We still have the same discourse, the same apparently full sentence. the value of labor is equal to the value of subsistence goods necessary for the maintenance and reproduction of labor, but this sentence means nothing. What is maintenance of labor? What is the reproduction of labor? The substitution of one word for another at the end of the answer, labor for the labor, might seem to settle the question. The value of labor is equal to the value of the subsistent goods necessary for the maintenance of reproduction of labor. Well, yeah, I mean, I can read that on. We just kind of explained it, and he's just flushing that out. For it is not the laborer who brought it. Okay, so maybe we go here. This omission located by the answer and the answer itself immediately next to the word labor is no more than the presence in the answer of the absence of his question. The omission of his question or the question posed does not seem to contain anything by which to locate in it this omission. What is the value of labor? Is a sentence identical to a concept. It is a concept sentence which is content to utter the of concept value of labor, an utterance sentence which does not designate any omission in itself, unless it is itself as a whole a concept, a question manic,
Monkey.
monkey. Oh, downloading my dictionary. Manque, feminine manqué from French for mist, is a person who has failed to live up to a specific expectation or ambition. It is usually used in combination with a profession. For example, a career civil servant with political prowess who nonetheless never attain a political office might be described as a politician manque or monk or whatever fuck. Okay, a question monk.
So like the whole question, like kind of was a fail son, I guess.
Mhm.
Or are they
A
concept value of labor or the question, what is the really Marx doesn't like go off with these like where does value he's like going to go back to what is where does value come from, you know?
right. A
I'm gonna call people
const.
call people
Go
monks
ahead.
from I'm gonna call people monks from one. I'm
Oh
a
yeah, I'm
philosopher,
used.
say that.
I took French. You're a monk.
Yeah, it
You
might be
never.
monkey.
You're a. What's a monk? Well, it's easy. It's someone who's in a profession and never lives up to the excellence in that profession. You know, That's- we need a word for that. A concept
Economy are
monk.
gonna be a who's gonna not gonna be a monk in this
The economy
paid
itself,
enough.
James. The silence within the economy. The omission monk of a concept. It is the answer that answers us about the question, since the question's only space is this very concept of labor, which is designated by the answer as the site of the omission. It is the answer that tells us that the question is its own omission and nothing else. I mean, this is like a really close reading of saying stuff like, okay, not there is like a conceptual question here, um, which the answer is not living up to, and the answering just like addressing the question of what is labor or what are these concepts? Like the concepts are trying to um come together and describe each other or flesh each other out. something to that effect. I understand him to be doing at a micro level. Okay. So then he
Right.
goes on to,
He's kind of
yeah,
like
go
a
ahead, go ahead.
way between the answer and the question, because you keep talking about the answer that's kind of missing its question, or the question was never posed, and then
Hmm.
this concept, and the question itself is an omission, and then the question is, yeah, I think he's just saying the question. The answer too also keeps changing. He's gonna like change it later on in this section. Kind of like there's some kind of
Hmm.
interplay.
The answer is the answer to a different question, which has the peculiarity of not having been uttered. Ooh, and what's that question? How to say? Um, been uttered in the suspension points of the answer, precisely in the answer suspension points, which is why Marx can write the result the analysis led to, therefore, was not a resolution of the problem as it emerged at the beginning, but a complete in the terms of the problem. Citation omitted, I guess.
People get mad at
I
me
think,
when I answer questions with a question. How come he gets to do
well, have you killed anyone? Like they're probably maybe a little
it?
That's
I have
right.
not, as of today.
almost thought we wouldn't bring it up, huh?
It must be said that this man killed his wife.
I think the question is, what's the value of labor power, or what is value?
You have what is value, I think, or where it comes from, um, and basically what he's saying. I mean, without kind of thinking too much about this, is that these texts are like impotent because of reasons he's going to get to later. But in some way, they're not. They're just like not doing justice to. I think these are the wrong ways of saying it. I just feel like he wants to read it in this very hyper focused linguistic structure, which is like Althusser fucking loves language, of course, much like Lacan.
Some of these I'm waiting to because where it's assumed that there's an issue, I don't know that I always agree that there is one. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know that but I'm trying to I'm also just irritable today, so everything sounds like a bad idea to me.
sure.
Uh, but it does feel a little bit to, in the same way that he suggested, Marx, pointed out that the what does he say? The biggest issue was that the question had not been posed yet.
Right.
And here a little bit, I feel like he's flying past. Maybe
The
it's just the
question,
way he writes, but he's very confidently asserting that there's issues to problems that he's decided existed in the first place, but I'm just not sure I'm totally with him, but I'm trying to be patient because I am critical of all things. And so that's just sort of the lens I view through the world through is like, what is the issue with this? Why is this a problem? I don't know that in an insular community in a small universe that the circular nature of the value of the labor is the what's required to keep the labor going effectively. But when profit is removed from the equation, it's not a theological argument where we have to start from how do we get something from nothing. It's a community of people that so long as everybody is providing their labor to create the things that all people in the community need, their basic subsistence level, that it's okay that it's circular. In fact, it kind of needs to be because all people have more than one need, but they're going to be laboring on probably a pretty narrow, range of products that they're producing.
Mhm.
Am
Yeah,
I way off base here?
no, I agree, but that would describe like communism or something, but it doesn't describe capitalism even like in Smith's time, you know.
Oh no, it's yeah,
Yeah.
that
So
doesn't
that's
work for capitalism. Yeah,
and
that's
also I just finished reading that Bataille, and he would disagree too because he says we always produce an excess and have to get rid of that. All societies do. Um, I was going to say no, but I agree with you because like it seems like he's trying to convince us that Marx was better than the classical economicists, or more right, or we should agree with him, which I do already. He already got me, but like then he's trying to use this to prove like this specific Althusser specific reading of Marx to like should be better than other readings of Marx. He's like talking to Marxists, but like this part, it's like we're already agreeing with you that Adam Smith missed a lot of things or like didn't see things.
there's
Yeah. Mhm.
some deification of Marx and also himself at the same time uh, uh, is how it's
Yeah, he
seen.
has another book about like for Marx. He's like,
Yeah, as in he
Yeah.
writes
he's
Marx.
into the guy.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, and a bunch of people were in these lectures. I mean, that's all true. Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of Marxists lecturing to other Marxists in France before 67. Dreams are still alive. I mean, there's that point. There are a couple of problems with which I think Mark's trying to grapple with in Capital, aside from like figuring out what the fuck capitalism is. It's like, why now? Why this? Why like this? And then the other one is kind of like the prophetic section of like, how would such a system develop, right? Which then you come to the theory of what is it, the failing profits and all that, and which is also connected to the value of the labor theory. But yeah, I mean, on some end, he's trying to kind of say Marx is doing these things that are, yeah, I mean, you could be like, yeah, I can see that. Maybe not intentionally, but his style of writing sure does kind of invoke these things. Because, I mean, I can see a lot of people like repeating stuff that Marx is saying about Smith and then present those as, oh, this is what Marx is saying. A lot of people make those mistakes, like just reading message boards and stuff. They're like, what is the value of labor? Oh, the value of labor is that thing that gets you reproduced to come back to work. And it's like, no, Marx was like doing a couple of different demonstrations just to kind of
Like the
develop his
wage,
own
right?
thought.
That's
Right.
the wage, like the labor, like there's well, talking to people who've read Marx, like I just want to skip to the part where like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No,
surplus value, surplus. I just had to say it.
surface value, right. But yeah, so in that sense, I agree with all of your points. But at the same time, I was like, it wasn't until I finished the sections we had to read, and I was like, oh, okay, we're talking about, well, maybe we shouldn't give
That's
it away.
yeah, no, that's
Ideology.
why I've been here before where I'm angry at most of a text that I read, sometimes just because of writing style, but
Yeah,
and then I get to the end where everything's tied together, and then I feel like an asshole because they're right and I can't explain why they're wrong, and so they win.
you're like, I should have been waiting
I
this,
should I
shit.
should have been happy and reading this whole
Yeah.
thing and been curious and then gotten the answer at the end. versus confused and angry the whole time, which is a great way to approach philosophy with
Yeah, I think
frustrated
uh,
minds.
again, talking about Hegel, there's that Hegel talks about, like, when he's writing a preface, and then he talks about preface, and then he wants to know, he's like, what's the point of a fucking preface when you haven't read the whole book? You know what I mean? Like this thing that is telling you about things to come, which you haven't experienced yet, so you
Yeah, and
can't
it's like
grasp.
any book. I always skip the parts where it's like chapter one. I do this. It's like I'll just read the whole chapter. I don't
Yeah.
just a paragraph about the chapter itself. Like,
I mean, you know where that's come from. Those are dissertations that are turned to books because in your first chapter of dissertation, you're like, first I'll do this, then I do this. I'm like, okay, that was great for your professors. Leave it out. Let's get to this fucking book. Yeah, okay. So this is why Marx can pose the unuttered question simply by uttering the concept present in an unuttered form in the emptiness in the answer, sufficiently present in this answer to produce and reveal these emptiness as the emptiness of a presence. Marx reestablishes the continuity of the other utterance by introducing slash reestablishing in the utterance the concept of labor power. Presence in the emptiness in the utterance of classical political economy's answer, and at the same time as reestablishing the continuity of the answer by the utterance of the concept of labor power. He produces he produces the as yet unopposed question, which the as yet unasked for answer answered. Every time I see this utterance, it's like, I don't know if when you take like philosophy of language, and it's like utterance, utterance, utterance. Like everybody's just like talking about fucking that word. Um, the answer then becomes the value of labor power is equal to the value of the subsistence goods necessary for the maintenance and reproduction of labor power. And his question is produced as follows. What is the value of labor power? This restoration of an utterance containing emptiness and his production of its question out of the answer enables us to bring to light the reason why classical economics was blind to what it nevertheless saw, and thus to explain the non-vision inside its vision. Moreover, I think here's where we're getting to it. It is clear that the mechanism whereby Marx is able to see what classical economics did not see while seeing it is identical with the mechanism whereby Marx sees what classical economics did not see at all. And also, at least in principle, identical with the mechanism whereby we are at this moment reflecting this operation of the sighting of a non-side of the scene by reading a text by Marx, which is itself a reading of a text of classical economics. So that's why I was saying in kind of a beginning about this reading of a reading, and and I think that kind of what he's getting to is that I guess here's why where he's giving Marx his props is this idea of like, yeah, well, okay, Adam Smith, what the fuck is even the question that you're trying to answer here? And he's saying that like Marx kind of like pulls the question out of these answers by again showing what they're showing, and what that showing is blind. Even the showing is showing you, right? I mean, uh, it, and this is the James that we're talking about this in that podcast, that partially examined life you sent me, and someone made this comment in the passing, which is very correct. It's like half of Wealth of Nations, where Adam Smith is like, how do we deal with these problems of capitalism, right? I mean, we read this in our underground, right? Adam Smith, like talking about what happens to the soul of someone who's in an assembly line making needles all day and they're just like in charge of, I don't know, pressing it down or whatever. Then the other guy like picks it up and puts it in the box. That repetition and stuff. Now, Adam Smith doesn't use the word alienation or expand upon those kind of Feuerbachian and later Marxist theories, but he's seeing the problems of like what this system does to the worker, and then the classical economics, of course, they're like, okay, we just need to mitigate those social ills that fall from capitalism without going deeper into it, flushing it out. They're like, here's a system. The system creates this kind of people or does these things with people, right? I guess the point I'm making is what Althusser is making. It's like it's not like those guys didn't see the problem, or more specifically, these questions of value. Um, it's just that they were kind of blind to the scope of it. Huh.
Yeah, and that's interesting because like for Althusser, like this kind of Marx focus on alienation and this kind of early Feuerbachian kind of concepts is that early Marx and he like in Capital he's not really doing that. He's not really talking about the psychology of the worker. He's just explaining
Mm-mm.
capital like from this kind of distance, like
Yeah.
empirical kind of way of looking at it rather than a phenomenological or like looking at kind of the experience of a worker in capitalism. No, he starts with the commodity, famously, like doesn't have a psychology.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and following Engels, he does the chapter on kind of the condition of the workers and the bodies and women and children's fingers in the machinery. Those are, yeah, but it's not about psychology. So it's he's kind of his approach is that
You get
uh
that alienation over this just kind of like through the exploitation, like in the work of the worker and
yeah.
just repetitive nature and even the technology stuff. He talks about that a little bit. You get this kind of like and like making these relation of things like between worker and each other and like the job becomes like like you're saying just push a button and you're kind of have this alienation from the products of your labor that you make that you don't see yourself in them.
Yeah, which kind of result in alienation from yourself and then kind of the rest of humanity and atomization of the population, all that. And yeah, I mean, yeah, a version of these are in Wealth of Nations, and even fucking people like Edmund Burke were talking about this stuff, but not such like this. And he wants to kind of make Marx special. I mean, the way he's approaching these his silences in his text. So here's kind of we've gotten to what he wants to say, and here it says we must completely reorganize the idea we have of knowledge. We must abandon the mirror myth of immediate vision and reading and conceive knowledge as a production. All right, here I think we after six sections, we are getting to what he wants to say, right? And that the knowledge is production, right? Where we're now straight in the arms of Foucault and all these people and the theories of ideology that um that there's the empiricist and these people who see kind of like the world is a collection of limited facts, and those facts are kind of represented in the things of the world or in the thingness of the world. The human conception of the world takes those facts in, right? And they then become knowledge. And any kind of epistemological theory of knowledge that goes that. And of course, these people just throw trash all of that shit because they want to say it's like, no, like knowledge is a as Jordan was saying, like there's this kind of closed circuit somewhat of a society, and knowledge is a byproduct of that, like how that circuit engages with the world in a social sense, not in individual. I see a frog. Now I have frog knowledge.
Yeah,
But
and for I
frog
think
knowledge is
Althusser,
already in the world. You're just seeing it and then saying it. And this, yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
and for Althusser, it's like through institutions that produces knowledge, right? So I say it's a
100%.
frog
Yeah.
because like that's what I learned in school. Like legally, that's a frog. It's a protected species by this group, or like
Yeah.
there's a court case about this frog in wetlands or something that produced this knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you read Madness and Civilization, Foucault, or Discipline, Punishment, The Order of Things, Althusser's writing on ideology. Yeah, there's variations between all of them, but they're all saying the same thing. It's like it's knowledge is something that is part of the which these people all look at in suspicion, right? What did James, what did Rick Roderick call it? Like,
Hermeneutics of suspicion.
what is it? What of suspicion?
The hermeneutics or masters of suspicion or something like
Masters
that.
of suspicion, hermeneutics of suspicion, and all that, because they're like they're doing value judgment in their epistemological theory, right? It's like madness is not something that a science of psychology will discover in your fucking brain. Madness is a classification of institutions, and institutions are results of history, and history is, of course, the result of class struggle, and class struggle is, of course, about power and domination and master slave dialectic, right? So the genealogy of knowledge. Now we've arrived at Nietzsche, of course, which all these guys fucking masturbated to. Um, the right again in genealogy of morals. I mean, of course, Nietzsche is very suspicious of socialism or any political project, but he's like, oh, where did this Christian morality come from? Oh, you have to look at the oppression of Jews by the Romans and the reversion of values within Greek and then Roman society, upper classes, which the downtrodden then take those values and spin them around. Yeah, it's not a Marxist approach to history, but it has the same idea that values are not eternal, they're not in nature, there's no kind of a natural order or anything like that. They're byproduct of development of history. Development of history is about power, and those are captured in that.
I read this book on Nietzsche and Marx. I can't remember the name right now, but it's like How to Philosophize with a Hammer or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
all the socialists Nietzsche talked about were anti-Semites. Like, and he didn't really correspond with Marx or talk to Marx. And like, if only they could have talked, because I think they might have like have come to some understanding.
100%. I mean, it's always very important that to think about Nietzsche is like, look, all the fucking books he wrote, much like Voltaire, like they're in his last 10 years of his life, last 10 to 20 years. And this is like on their sickness, living in the fucking mountains, um, being isolated. Um, these are not products of
Migraines.
like, oh yeah, heavy migraines and then the loss of sanity. And of course, yeah, and during his youth, he was a lot more attracted to the aesthetic movements than fucking German thinkers like Marx. Um, yeah, so then he goes, what made the mistake of political economy possible does indeed affect the transformation of the object of its oversight. What political economy does not see is not a pre-existing object, which it could have seen but did not see, but an object which had produced itself in its operation of knowledge and which did not pre-exist it. Precisely the production itself, which is identical with the object. I mean, this is profound. Like, this is where we're like, all right, I'm glad I'm reading this book. Um, but also kind of a radical assertion, right? Because I mean, it's a huge attack on Anglo philosophy, epistemology, all this stuff. This idea saying that look, the production is identical with this object, right? That the thing you're saying is not pre-existing, it's there, it's in this process that you're also a part of.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's not describing the actual thing that you say you're talking about, like the economy, the political
right.
economy. And
Yeah.
like too, like that's why I love it, because I love any kind of outsider philosophy because this I think just happens when, you're Smith or Ricardo or Hume, you're very well off people who are just kind of writing the narrative of of like capitalism, basically, the myth, and then you just
Yeah.
dust off your hands like, okay, we explained it, now let's move on. And
Yeah, and it's important to
great,
mention
but
that,
what do we do about the poor workers? It's like, okay, well,
yeah, UBI or, this or that, social programs, which these guys come
yeah,
up with.
like
Um,
what Foucault says about prison reform, that it came about the same time as prisons. Angela
exactly.
Davis
Right,
says that.
right. I mean, it's very, again, going back to Foucault, it talks about like, they're like asylums. Fuck these things. Let's have these people like in houses where they can, yeah, hang around, interact, use silverware, but then they sit at the dinner and then he's talking about, when you're going for punishment into kind of eternalization of the silent discipline, right? And everybody's like looking around, being like, am I using the fork right? Is it the right hand? Do you hold the knife with the left hand? Am I being civilized right now? And the beauty of discipline is that the individuals within society, atomized society, inflict it on themselves. But another important point is that both Althusser and Marx are very clear. It's like we're not like morally judging Adam Smith and these guys. They could not have seen um, the world um, in any other way that they saw as byproducts of where they were. Um, well, maybe that's too much. They could have, but it's not for the lack of trying, rather. Um, yeah, I want to skip a little and go to this next page. I mean, this are all good, but he's talking about, and let me see my note. What did I put here? Not a problem. And his own psychology. Okay. Because his eyes are, why is political economy necessarily blind to what it produces and to its product, work of production? Because its eyes are still fixed on the old question and it continues to relate its new answer to its old question. Because it is still concentrating on the old horizon within the new problem is visible. Marx, Volume 1, things the French edition still. Thus, the metaphor in which Marx thinks this necessary substitution suggests the image of a change of terrain and a corresponding change of horizon. They rise a crucial point which enabled us to escape from psychological reduction of the oversight or unconscious. So this reminds me of Kuhn, of course. And what's his jargon in scientific revolution? Uh the systems of science happen in not brackets or something, the
Paradigms.
paradigms, right?
I mean,
That's
this is
what he's
even
saying.
Nietzschean. Nietzsche talks about horizons, like Gadamer. This is very hermeneutical.
Hmm.
But yeah, paradigm change, paradigm shift when kind of anomalies built up that I don't know, it's very similar because it's like things that like anomalies like before Einstein, like the orbit of Mercury wasn't really understood by Newton, but no one really bothered with it. They just put it aside. They knew about it. It wasn't like the same as what like Smith is doing. They were seen, but kind of just ignored for now and like let some other scientists in the future figure it out.
Right. And Kuhn is making the point that look, the whatever orbit of Jupiter they're thinking of at that point, within that system is working, right? I mean, he makes that point early on a couple of times when he's talking about Aristotle. It's like, look, that system of science where these things are working and they're working through it, like it's not that that's wrong, but that system of science, which is conceptualizing the world as such, it is itself a thing, not comparable to that, like the break in history or the change in epoch. I mean, of course, there's overlaps. We don't wake up to a new.
Yeah, whereas like I think classical, or at least with scientists, they'll see that and they'll know like, well, we have this theory, it doesn't quite explain how the actual world works, but we're still aware that the world is working different than our kind of map of the terrain of it. Whereas
Mhm.
the economists are like, no, our map is right. Like whatever the real economy is doing, well, our map is right. How can we like kind of refine our map more? I think too, like economists today are doing that, like
Oh,
who take it as a science and as a physics or something.
oh, I mean, today is the fucking worst. I mean, today now we have like the classical liberals or whatever who see themselves, who cast themselves. And this is funny because it also reminds me of um uh, uh, first as a tragedy and then and then as a joke or whatever. What is the code?
Farce.
Farce, right? Because like now we have people calling themselves classical liberals in the fashion of um Smith and these people, and like these people are like, look, that world doesn't even fucking exist anymore, right? I mean, those guys weren't getting it. I mean, what the fuck are you referencing, right? I mean, in the hyper developed capitalism that is beyond even the world that Marx was seeing in Britain, which at that point, like 20% of people were like laborers in the sort that he was describing.
Yeah, I mean, I would even switch it around. Like the first time is a farce, like, oh, like what classical liberals were saying, because then Marx came in and explained it first. Now it's a tragedy because
Right.
the
The,
classical
the,
liberals are in power. They're just destroying the
well,
world.
who exactly
So are
used that, right?
neoliberals. Yeah, I, which who used which one?
A guy you guys used to make fun of me a lot for being fucking obsessed with. Zizek. He had that book
Oh, I mean, I
first
read.
as farce, then as tragedy. Yeah, but
I
it's
have a
good.
pamphlet. I have a pamphlet that uses that as for like talking about the Trump administrations now.
Oh, sure. There you go. I mean, this is the thing. You read enough of this stuff, you start like producing it yourself. You're like if you like record yourself in your sleep, you're like, oh, I wrote a George Bataille book, like it's
Oh
like
yeah, knowledge is production. Whenever I was reading a lot of Zizek all the time, I'm like, yes, this is so right. My God, so right. Yeah.
so weird that I've been thinking the same thoughts. Um, yeah, so he goes on to, I don't think we need to like dive too deep in here. Except maybe this part, he says, like, what is in balance in this unstable and apparently local event is the possibility of a revolution in the old theory and hence in the old problematic as a totality. I read that as paradigm. This introduces us to a fact peculiar to the very existence of science. It can only pose problems on the terrain and within the horizon of a definite theoretical structure. It's problematic, which constitutes its absolute and definite condition of possibility, and hence the absolute determination of the forms in which all problems must be posed at any given moment in the science. Actually, this is, I always for that year that I taught like Persian history, I would teach Edward Said, and Edward Said would he really liked Althusser's use of problematic, which is not when you make a gay joke. at a party, that kind of problematic. But this idea of the theoretical structures and how they change and move, and their overlaps, and how kind of different paradigms can answer certain questions or even pose their own question because of their historical existence. He goes on to say, we must take these words literally. Deciding is thus no longer the act of an individual subject endowed with the faculty of vision, sort of, which he exercises either attentively or distractedly. Deciding is the act of a structural condition. It is the relation of immanent reflection between the field of the problematic and its objects and its problem. Vision then loses the religious privilege of divine reading. It is no more than a reflection of the imminent necessity that ties an object or problem to its condition of existence, which lies in the condition of its production. Another thing that is happening is like we're again like back to Kant with these guys that they're like, they want to get rid of fucking metaphysics um by doing a lot of it. You know? The footnote here is relation of imminent reflection. This reflection itself poses a theoretical problem which I cannot deal with here, but which will be outlined at the end of this introduction. Thank you. I wish you would put it right here so we knew. Um, it is literally no longer the eye, the mind's eye of a subject which sees what exists in the field defined by a theoretical problematic. It is this field itself which sees itself in the objects or problems it defines. Citing being merely the necessary reflection of the field uh, on its object. Um, so he's taking it kind of a step farther. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
that's crazy.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like the way you go ahead, James.
yeah,
I
I
feel
think
like,
there's, I don't know if this was in yours, but it says vision loses the religious privileges of divine reading.
yeah, I got it right here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it is this kind of like, well, rejection of like a detached observer kind of looking at the world and kind of scientific way, you know.
Yeah, I guess what I really like is he says it is this field itself which sees itself in the object or the problems it defines. You know what I mean? So like where you're going from again from the conscious observation to um almost like I mean it's weird because it's somewhat mystical, right? It's he's saying like these bodies of production and knowledge, this kind of paradigm of these dynamics, it is kind of self-reflecting and you are an aspect of that. You
Yeah,
know
I
what
mean,
I
it
mean?
makes a lot more sense to me in like when the
The
Foucault,
Matrix, man.
like the Foucault context makes sense to me, like when they created this concept of madness or pervert or deviant or runaway, like what was it, just drapetomania or something? Not a, like
Mhm.
art necessarily. Like I could see the field itself, like well, being like the scientific field. Like I don't know what he means by maybe it's the same kind of idea, like the field, the field of study creates its own objects of study that it's about to kind of like tell itself that it's like looking around and I see crazy people over here. I need to, or like, how can we explain why these enslaved people are running away? Well, it must be this thing I'm just going to make up. Or why can we explain why people don't want to kind of um, just submit and be normal people in this and be a good little worker and do this that? Well, they must have some kind of
Yeah, no, I think it is in that same sense. I mean, I imagine like being, at your first philosophy course, at Portland Community College, and you're doing like intro to philosophy, and you're reading some essays about empiricism, right? And there's no fucking question. Empiricism like does away with some questions or questioning some presupposition. And it's like, look, we're talking about conscious understanding. But I mean, these guys would come and say it's like actually like um what is happening when you're thinking those thoughts is just like actually like the historical paradigm that has created things like empiricism and you as a part of that or thinking itself as a part of that is reflecting on itself. It's kind of like plucking one of your eyes and have it stare into the other one, right? There is this kind of loop of things reflecting upon themselves and then seeing things as such. Um,
Maybe
yeah.
this is a silly question, but you could just look in the mirror instead of plucking your eyeball to point it at your other eyeball, right?
Not
Well,
necessarily.
I mean, you're getting this kind of mediation through the mirror. I think we've
Yeah.
never actually seen ourselves because I mean, yeah, mirror, we all assume that it's a true reflection, but the actual eye is still connected to your eyeball, like
Yeah.
seeing your
Yeah, it is
the
still
metaphor is
connected
supposed
to your
to
brain. So it was only seeing the seeing.
There's
You know what I
no
mean?
intermediary that's okay.
Yeah, and actually he said it in the first paragraph here. He's like, we must abandon the mere myth of immediate vision and reading. Right? And mirror myth is that the mirror myth is that the idea that the world is reflected in your mind.
Mhm.
Right?
yeah,
Um,
and like I think too like
it's
the
the other way around.
Cartesian like little person in your homunculus in your head looking out at the world too.
Right. And then there's like a midget homunculus in that
Impressions,
homunculus
yeah.
head. Yeah, yeah. And then there's one inside. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, not to get fucking into medieval philosophy, but yeah, it's that same idea that he's attacking. It's the very idea that is still alive, unfortunately. Um, this idea like what is a woman is then, a question that is like, of course I know what a woman is. I know about chromosomes. I know what a pussy look like. You know what I mean? And you're like,
Yeah,
well, that's a very like empirical approach to something that's going to be very problematic. Like for example, ask you what a vagina is, which 99% of society will come up with some kind of functional definition. Oh, it does X, Y, and Z. Oh, what about when those functions are suspended? Does that thing still defines its owner? Well, let's talk about chromosomes. You know what I mean? Rather than
yeah.
being like,
I've never seen a
oh,
chrome in my life, so I don't believe him.
um,
It's like the same
yeah,
people that deny germ theory will be like chromosomes. It's like why didn't you believe in these microscopic things you can't see? But these
and
define your whole like politics about.
I mean, that's a great irony of it, right? I mean, those same guys, they're like, fuck the pharmaceutics, but I'm gonna take, ivermectin to cure my, ball testicle. It's like,
Yeah, and two, I was
like, what is
thinking
the
about
difference here?
two, I was thinking about with this mirror thing, like Freud, and like you read a lot, or a lot of you might say it like a lot of like maybe someone makes a movie or writes a book or talks about a dream they had. Well, you're really just talking about yourself and like these things that your unconscious can't really just say, but you're kind of putting them out in this hence of this movie or even an action that you're doing that some kind of psychological defense for something you can't say, like you're projecting this or doing that. Rather, you're all just like focused immediately on yourself. You know, you're,
Yeah, and kind of I feel like the next step here is again, I mean, beating a dead horse here. Like this guy is talking about like itself seeing you rather, or you, your subjectivity is part of what is being produced.
Through this like interpolation of
R-
like field seeing itself, or
yeah,
some
right. And I think you read his that that book on ideology or the state or what it was, and he's
yeah,
talking
and he
about the
talks about interpolation of
policeman.
yeah, a policeman saying, "Hey, you," and you turn and look, and that's like the creation of the subject there.
Yeah, suddenly you're
This
like,
through this
oh,
institution that's
me?
like created its own field, right? If you add this in, like law enforcement's created its own field of, created itself through this kind of like, oh, we need to defend the law that we just made, and
Right,
try to
right.
tie that book
And
with this book together.
yeah, and I think there's they're exactly talking about the same thing. I mean, same author, of course, but that you're like, oh, it's me. I'm walking down the street, but it's like Eunice really comes when a policeman, when an agent of the institution is like creates you by being like, hey, you, because that's the only time you actually are like having those moments. Now, of course, you're having millions of those moments throughout the day, but they're very socially specific.
And you're having them
Um,
like, from birth, when you're like given a birth to the kid, assigned a gender, like made a legal person.
yeah,
Not everyone, I guess. Like, I guess depends on
but
the
in some
circumstances,
way,
but yeah.
it
But
doesn't. Yeah, I
eventually
mean,
it'll
there's
get you
no.
there if you're a refugee, like, or whatever happens.
Yeah, and and this happens to these people in any society. I mean, again, it's going back to Lacan and the mirror image essay, right? Which like the child is like, oh, stuff, standing in front of the mirror. There's mother behind, making gestures, complimenting the child's actions or movements, blah blah blah. And then child becomes aware of his separation from the mother, and then the reflection in the image, and this whole dynamic starts solidifying subjectivity out of this very fluid existence. Um, yeah, so and then he goes here, these new objects and problems are necessarily invisible in the field of existing theory because they are not objects of this theory, because they're forbidden by it. They're objects and problems necessarily without any necessary relation with the field of the visible as defined by this problematic. They're invisible because they're rejecting in principle, repressed from the field of the visible. And that is why their fleeting presence in the field, when it does occur in very peculiar and symptomatic circumstances, goes unperceived and becomes literally an undivulgeable absence. Excuse me. Since the whole function of the field is not to see them, to forbid any sighting of them. Here again, the invisible is more a function of a subject sighting than is visible. The invisible is the theoretical problematics non-vision of his non-object. The invisible is the darkness, the blinded eye of the theoretical problematic self-reflection when it scans its non-objects. It's very like Philip K. Dick right there. It's non-problems without seeing them in order not to look at them.
Is this
I,
by design, or is this what is there any sort of intention to this? If
no.
okay,
Mm,
it's just sort
mm,
of inherent in how these fields are developed that they are. It's kind of being reductive, but the dismiss, and sometimes they just assume, because a lot of these are. I wish I had more specific things to point to, but um, that in various theories, in order for them to function, certain things have to either be true or not true. And instead of reaching the point at which you have proven that it's true or not true, it just sort of presupposes one or the other in order for it to function, and that the system is designed in a way that it can, if you assume this is true, then these areas of non-sight are just, the way this is constructed makes these either not invisible so much as irrelevant. It's is my I
Yeah,
guess
I
my
think it's
question is
I
just
think
that
it's like a
Yeah.
necessary for it because like the classical economy can't say, oh, this whole system runs on exploitation, alienation. It's bad, it's terrible, right? I go Freudian again, where it's like the things we repress because we can't say them, or else it would like destroy yourself when you really think about it. Like a kind of a person or whatever, like whatever the issue is, or some kind of like like for Freud's time, if like, oh, you lusted after a same-sex person, same gender person, whatever. Like it's not a problem now, but for then it's like, how do you deal with this thing? You have to kind of hide some things and repress some things, or else it would be too devastating for you. Yeah, like in this context, you can't really say what the system is about because then you're saying, oh, it's not a good thing. It's not going to also lift all everyone's boats, rise all the boats, and like make everyone wealthier
Mhm.
if it's intended to make a certain group of people wealthy at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah, I think
Contradictions, you have to ignore some things to kind of continue on.
Okay,
y-
that makes
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a kind of great question. I mean, like this is not a conspiracy as, unfortunately a lot of Marxists are today, and a version of this happens in any form of society perceiving in its own form. I mean, he's kind of talking very abstractly, but very much about history. And I think the Freud one, it would really work if we're like thinking going out of those clinical examples that Wolfman and stuff that Freud make and go into like civilization and its discontent. It's like it's just very Rousseauian, you know what I mean? It's like, look, this shit kind of sucks, but it's also really good. It gets us to do X, Y, and Z, but it comes at a cost. And I think like it's more about like things wouldn't fucking make sense even they were that would come up and they look at you in the face. I mean, one thing you look at, um there's a dialogue in the movie Margin Call, where Jeremy Irons talking to Kevin Spacey's character near the end, and he's like, and the movie's of course about the 2007 2008 crash. And Jeremy Irons, they're eating at this tower. They're I forgot what corporation or financial institution they're supposed to be, who are about to just sell all their shit before the crash happens because they have foreknowledge of it. And Jeremy Irons is like, look, um, focusing on capitalism, like since the fucking first decade that it matures, like in the 1850s and 60s, first in Britain and then moving on, Germany, France, all this stuff, then United States, all in different forms, like crash, 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 huge crashes where millions of people die, people get dispossessed, and the amount of value keeps getting concentrated in little and little portions of society, right? Today, you turn on the TV, there's the most richest billionaire in the world, um, siege hiling and is going to be in charge of your life. Elon Musk, right? He siege hiles twice at a rally on millions of camera. Anti-Defamation League, supposedly the most, the Jews who, see a fucking kafia, and go after schools and, call everything anti-Semitism. ADL came, Jonathan Greenblatt goes on TV and is like, that was not a Nazi salute, right? Because the idea that you've kind of regressed back to fucking kingdom and feudalism and like billionaires are doing something and they're doing this wrong and like things are fucked up and like California is burning, you know what I mean? Climate change, like none of your
It's worse than
conversations can
feudalism.
hold.
Feudalism, at least we
Oh,
we
you
have
have
our own pots of
protection.
food. The
Yeah.
kings had there was far less wealth inequality than there is now.
Oh my
Um,
God. No,
yeah,
no,
feudalism wouldn't be like
no,
feudalism. We could
nothing.
start over, try to do some Federici and just go straight to the solution.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like Samuel Moyn that I'm reading right now, who's talking about, this problem of like taking brutality out of war is making it ubiquitous and last longer because we're trying to humanize this thing that we should like fucking ban with all our might. Gaza right now, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people dying, their cities demolished. You know what I mean? I mean, it goes on and on, right? Like all these horrible things. They're happening in the capitalistic world. They're part of the production, they're part of economies, they're part of this life world. They can come up in conversations. They would not register because, like, the ideological apparatus that is born within this system of production will not allow most people to see and acknowledge them and to address them, right? Because it's like Bush said after 9/11, go shop. Because people are like, David Harvey talks about this. It's like people stop shopping, it would end. Like capital was stopped. Like this world as we know it would end, right? We saw this with COVID.
Yeah, well, and yeah,
They
with
don't
COVID,
pay
people
people
stopped
so they could
shopping.
sustain. They pay people so they can go fucking buy shit.
Well, they can
So
go buy stuff and be distracted from sitting there talking to each other and going to the streets and having. We had one of the largest uprisings in the U.S. in recent years. Because people were
yeah,
talking and didn't have
it,
to go to work for fucking 40 hours a week.
yeah. I think that distraction and stuff, those are like secondary because now you're talking about like conscious manipulation of society and stuff. But like at this initial stage, you know what I mean? This idea of like, holy shit, the world is like getting really fucked up. Um, there is just like no kind of will or movement even can emerge to even oppose it momentarily. You know what I mean? And now you have like four people sitting next to Trump in the inauguration, right? Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, Elon, right? And combined, they have more money that the history of the world ever produced, right? If, in terms of value. Not oh they own more than the 99% and all that shit. It's like no, more than any value that is ever produced in the totality of history. And however you would calculate that. So I think like how Althusser is coming to this problem of ideology is like what it does in mass to just kind of um everything, especially any opposition or any contradiction within it. Uh, we know that capitalism causes crashes because it's financialized. Financialized is about betting. People bet. You bet at some point someone wants their fucking money back that you're betting through. Things crash. I mean, it's inevitable. Um, sorry, that
And they
was
don't
my
say
kind
that.
of.
They can't say that. They have to say it's like the best, most stable system or this kind of natural.
Well, they
It's
say it
just,
was a mistake.
yeah.
Oh, some
Yeah, the
people were
crashes are.
greedy, right?
I
Some
mean, now
people
you
were
have
greedy.
even people who are like liberal Democrats, who like just like, oh, it's greedy people. We need to get rid of greed. Like that becomes
Right. I
we
mean,
just got
that's
rid
the
of
best we
those
got out
four
of
greedy
fucking.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. If you like, imagine if it like, I mean, this Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, that's the best he came up with was like, oh, they're greedy people. We need policies. Or Warren. These are great people. They're smart people. They work for the people. It is my belief and understanding. But even their answer is like, are you fucking kidding me? You know?
We'll just like
Um,
put a limit on how much money someone can make and tax it if they make millions of dollars. Okay, well, there's still have enough money to just change that law and like buy any politicians. That's the problem.
well, yeah. Did you watch the Senate hearing where Bernie Sanders was like, federal minimum wage is still $7. Maybe we should raise it. The guy was like, uh-uh. That's like a state thing. The guy got elected, by the way. Long story short, $7 fucking an hour minimum. Imagine that in this world. Um, but I'm in the beating of the dead horse, and I want to come back to the fucking text. But I think it's really important, like to think about this stuff. Well, I want to go on about like since I brought up Israel and Palestine right now, right? It's like, yeah, you can be like, oh, these are just like Jews and Muslims. They've been killing each other forever, right? Some kind of abstract, idealistic approach to the world. Oh, these are just like ideas battling. No, one is like a hub of like technical production and tech and a great buyer of weaponry and you know they also produce stuff for for the world. You know that's where drone technology comes from. Um,
Well, that's where they
uh,
get to a lot of this kind of new military equipment on
that's
Israel.
the apparatus, right? I mean, the drones were first flew over the West Bank and Gaza in their inception. This is not Sean. This is from Israeli authors, mainly Rise and Kill First. You know, I mean, these are not conspiracies. But again, it's about production. It's about the certain modalities of production and the world that they create and what kind of arguments can come out of that. But at an even deeper level, it's like we are part of that world. Like this conversation wouldn't exist in 2025 Spain, Arab Spain or whatever. Um anyways.
Happy for the best. I can't wait for them.
Yeah. Oh, look at this. Uh,
Yeah, and like I don't know, I was watching again
uh,
going to Palestine stuff, but like I watched the news with my students and like the kids news, and it's talking about the war. It's in Israel and Hamas, and my
yeah,
students
war.
break like they already know. I've already taught them stuff. They're like, yeah, no, Israel started it. Blah blah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's a war. If like and if I go and like beat a dog, that's a
Yeah, and that's
fight.
like the
You know what I mean?
propaganda they're giving to children, and but I even see like, people I'm getting off the social media, but we see people in there just spouting the same kind of propaganda.
Oh, it's
People who
garbage
listen
and
people who listen to NPR and like think they're knowledgeable or some shit.
informed. But I want to actually like maybe beat this horse a little more. It's important to point out what it produces on the other side, right? I mean,
Sure, yeah.
Osama bin Laden is a production of American intervention in the world, or a bunch of fucking Saudis wouldn't be traveling to Pakistan and then, developing this new form of Islam, and then start seeking funds, and then starting that thing. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
9/11 is a part
yeah.
of this world.
Yeah,
It's
and it
not
all works out as part of
barbarics. Yeah, yeah. We're gonna.
yeah, like in the Bataille, I'm still thinking of Bataille, but like after the fall of the Soviet Union, you need some reason to have this huge military budget and to kind of invest in those technologies, like the future drones with guns on them and stuff. So like
And the
you're
system
creating these
produces that
enemies,
answer.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there were people sitting down like, in University of Washington developing um international policy for the United States in like 1950, late 1950s and 60s. We like, we need to create another enemy for our country. It's like, no, this world creates that because of the mechanism that are, in progress. And I want to like read this whole part because I think, and since we use terms adopted from some very remarkable passage in the preface to Michel Foucault's Madness of Civilization, we have evoked the conditions of possibility of the visible and the invisible, of the inside and the outside of the theoretical field that define the visible. Perhaps we can go one step further and show that a certain relation of necessity may exist between the visible and invisible defined. This is very important. This is what we've been kind of saying this whole time. In the development of a theory, The invisible of a visible field is not generally anything whatever outside and foreign to the visible defined by that field. Fuck, this is important. The invisible is defined by the visible, and it's invisible. It's forbidden vision. The invisible is not therefore simply what is outside the visible, to return to the spatial metaphor, the outer darkness of exclusion, but the inner darkness of exclusion, inside the visible itself, because defined by structure. In other words, the seductive metaphors of the terrain, the horizon, and hence the limits of a visible field defined by a given problematic threaten to induce a false idea of the nature of this field. If we think this field literally accordingly to the spatial metaphors as a space limited by another space outside it, this other space is also in the first space, which contains it as its own denegation. This other space is the first space in person, which is only defined by the denegation of what it excluded from its own limits. In other words, we're on the fourth in the other words, I feel like. All its limits are eternal. It carries its outside inside it. This reminds me of organs without bodies, by the way. But all right, go ahead.
I have two metaphors for this. Like one is that sign, the sign that says it is illegal to read this sign. Do not read, like something like that.
Right.
Or have you read that China Mieville book, The City in the City, where
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
two cities in one geographical location, and if you're a citizen of this city, you can't
There are
look
different
or kind of acknowledge
jurisdictions.
the other city without going through like the border and go through customs and all that. But it's like just right there. But you acknowledge this, even though there's like architecture there of the other city that you're seeing, and like
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and China Miéville, of course, wonderful kind of Marxist author, and I read his, I my paper in JD was mainly based on his writings on international law from the Marxist perspective. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that is exactly what he's talking about. I wanted to point out this footnote. The recourse made in this text to spatial metaphors, field, terrain, space, site, situation, position, etc., poses a theoretical problem. The problem of the validity of its claim to existence in a discourse with scientific pretensions. The problem may be formulated as follows. Why does a certain form of scientific discourse necessarily need the use of metaphors borrowed from non-scientific disciplines? That's good. That's good stuff. We of course see this in quantum physics, which wants to kind of like talk about the smallest aspects of the universe, but and it by using language, it utilizes the spatial vocabulary and stuff, except none of them are describing what they want to describe because they always have to go back and say, well, this thing doesn't extend in space as you understand a chair to
or
extend in
like
space, right?
electron spin. It's like it doesn't actually spin. It's not even really a thing like a defined spot in space.
Yes.
What is it? But like how else we're visual kind of like people like rely on vision a lot. So like we talked about this in a couple of our classes.
It's it,
And
it's a
like because
fascinating
quantum
question.
physics is just like a bunch of would be just a bunch of math equations, right? But like that doesn't tell you anything unless you. I think even
Put
if you
it
can
in
do the math, it
language.
doesn't really. How do you understand that?
Mhm.
How do you see? I even go. How do you visualize that? How do you cognate? How do you cognize that?
Yeah, and to be really cute, I mean, is the language of mathematics itself the so-called like language of God, right? Like when you read in the Quran, the Quran is very explicit that like hey y'all, like Arabic is the thing, That's the way God presents itself in this world, right? And mathematics is kind of looked at like that, like, oh, this is the most fundamental, essential aspects of universe, which this tiny brains in this corner of the universe happen to describe, and it tells you everything.
Or like the source code of the universe or whatever. Which yeah,
No, exactly.
yeah, I talked about my
It's
students
the
that.
matrix things, right? The numbers falling. You just have learned to read it. Um,
Yeah, and it's revealed to us from the forms. Like a lot of mathematicians are Platonists.
yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like the British empiricists, actually, like Alfred Whitehead and Bertrand Russell, right? I mean, they're talking about Principia Mathematica. They're like, well, what is the logical underpinning of 2 + 2 = 4? Right? And it's like 400 pages. They're like, actually, I don't know. It's like, let's move on to Wittgenstein, and his like 13-page thesis.
Gödel, right? The incompleteness theorem.
Yeah, there's the incompleteness theorem, all that, but I think this all relates, right? Again, you're trying to um the very scientifically present the world in this mirror image to the mind. Um Problem
As
is
if
that
you're kind of standing outside of it.
from a God eye
I'm
view,
looking at math as the code of the universe. From like you're kind of putting yourself in that position of God, like looking at their language is their or I don't know.
yeah. And you're reading Thacker right now, right? Like the view from nowhere. Um but that is wrong because mathematics is a creation of history, of human ingenuity, human function. It's not, there's not a two hiding behind the tree, winking at you with his dick out, right? I don't know, James, you remember
Wink
like
is
the
like if
design
you have it out,
comics.
like the wink is just I get your point with the I'm not interested.
It's like I see the visible. It's not
Yeah.
invisible. Um, so this is a great point. I'm gonna but I love this. This is like great stuff. I
I
mean,
gotta get
also,
food soon.
do what?
I gotta go make some food soon.
Should we wrap it up real quick?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's up to you guys if you're deep in it, but I haven't eaten
No,
in a
I
while.
was gonna stop at 8.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to hold you, but let's just wrap it up
Mhm.
5, 10 minutes or something. You want to?
Yeah.
Right. Um, Presence, fleeting presence of aspect of music. Okay, this production can only be invisible since the light of the field scans it blindly without reflecting on it. The invisible thus disappears as a theoretical lapse, absence, lack of symptom. It manifests itself exactly as it is, invisible to theory. This is why Smith made the oversight. We need an informed gaze, a new gaze, itself produced by, oh, so this is like the prescriptive aspects of this text. We need an informed gaze, a new gaze, itself produced by a reflection of the change of terrain on the exercise of vision in which Marx pictures the transformation of the problematic. Um, that the whole process takes place in the dialectical crises of the mutation of the theoretical structure in which the subject plays, not the part it is playing, but the part which is assigned to it by the mechanism of the process. All these questions that cannot be studied here. Marx can see what escapes Smith's eyes.
Yeah, that last part makes me think of something I actually wrote.
What?
About a paper on Irigaray about how there's like, Marx was like this really into Aristotle and like he's seeing what Aristotle didn't see in the kind of because there was slave labor and didn't see like the value of labor, right?
Hmm.
But what I was writing about, writing about Irigaray and reproductive labor and how Marx, she kind of implies something about Marx not seeing like kind of sexual difference and reproductive labor, as I would say.
Oh, yeah, I mean, not to get to that, I mean, I would say that he did say because he talks about women and work and all that. But yeah, I mean, of course, not as the Irigaray saw later
Yeah.
on.
Well, she's like
As a
going even further than like later Marxist feminists and thinking about like woman as a commodity.
right. Yeah, yeah, and some of these, of course, can be criticized as very deterministic and total, and hey, what's the point of it? But I think what we might learn later is like there is room for agency or overcoming these obstacles, at least to some extent, through the science of Marx.
Yeah, through the Vanguard or something, or new kind of new institution or the party
Ye-
or just
Yeah,
whatever
he's
Marx was
Leninist, right? Yeah.
get to that other horizon.
Right, right.
Doesn't this mean
Definitely a
also
vanguardist, but sorry.
um we there's always we need an there's always a constant need as time passes for a new informed gaze. And so even after Marx, we need more, if assuming all this is true now, we whatever, with each thing comes the things that by its design it cannot see, that it is blind to, and then the introduction of Marx, a new gaze after this thing has existed, now he can, bring to light. But then inherently every new gaze that comes along will have within it things that it cannot see.
Yeah.
And there has to be a constant, um I know it's not saying this, but I'm just assuming that in order for this to work, and I mean, that makes sense to me at a sort of a very basic level, as it also is hopeful in that each new iteration is a development and not a step backwards. But um,
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, yeah, I mean,
It's not always. I mean, there's look at Nietzsche. There's like you have like fascist readings of Nietzsche that became popular, and then think, yeah, it reminds me a lot of Gadamer, who's like talking about a lot of the same stuff, like feminist readings of Nietzsche. Then like you have some kind of like postmodern reading of Hume, like, and then whatever Gen Z thing is doing, reading of so and so. But I think I like this better because it's going to be tied to like material conditions and right, the readings
yeah, and I think there's like
depending
a
on and the institutions.
there's a theoretical point to be made here, and there's a great book on this. It's called The Algebra of Revolution, which is kind of why how post-Hegel the dialectical logic kind of was used to think about this stuff, and the kind of the hope in dialectics is that the antagonism always develops within the dialectics. Now, some people read Marx wrong and think like, oh, this inevitable antithesis within this dialectical progression can be a good revolution, which I don't think Marx ever believed. He was like, no, society can get worse, but history moves on. Nothing sustains, right? I mean, uh, again,
Yeah,
we're
I think
thinking
he's
about
saying
Marx talking about religion and stuff, right? I mean, this idea that, look, it destroys all these older systems of beliefs. It's not a matter of choice, right? Like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, these all necessarily have to change um, with these developments. Sorry,
I
James, what are
think
you?
I think he's saying like about that whole like progress. I think he's saying capitalism will progress into like worse and worse for the worker, like and like reforms or whatever, like it's going to get worse and worse for the worker. But that could go to communism or it could go to barbarism or fascism, depending on what happens.
Because of giving,
It's not inevitable either way.
yeah, it's not inevitable, but like the chance of revolution comes, but also chance of fucking non-revolution comes, or a communist state that would slaughter workers or whatever. Sure. But I think that's the light at the end of the dialectical tunnel
The
there.
communist state that tries to hold on to capitalism and keep like like save capitalism in its own way itself, just
Sure.
compete with capitalism.
Yeah, 100%. China is a great example of that. Um, okay, guys. I feel like we went our usual hour and a half. If everyone's satisfied, we'll continue with 8 and 9 and keep this going.
I'll never be satisfied, but it's a good place to stop.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
If we're not satisfied, it leaves it open for someone later to come back and see all the invisible things.
Do a reading of a reading of a reading. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Awesome.
we'll
Well,
see.
thanks, guys.
Yeah, maybe next week. My schedule's pretty open, so whenever you guys want to do these.
Sounds good. Last week I just forgot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to keep this going, and I got to start uploading these at some point. Fucking this week. Okay. Awesome, guys. Great talking. I'll see you next week.
See it.
Bye.
Bye.